please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to Business Lunch. I'm Nisha Podar and with me is Sonia Shenoy. Sonia, good afternoon. It's a lackluster day for the markets and take a look at Nifty 50. It's on the flat line right now. Sensex is still holding up in the green and Nifty has slipped into the red as we speak. It's the mid caps which are tremendously underperforming, more than 1% down, inching towards a 1.5% cut on that particular index, and it's the bank Nifty which is down more than 0.5%. As far as the advanced decline is concerned, remember that the whole mid-cap universe is underperforming today and therefore it's on the weakish side, Sonia.
Oh yes, but you know the good part is after the kind of big sell-off we saw yesterday during late trade, this is not a bad outcome. It's in flat terrain. At least it's not seen accelerated selling. Yes, the mid-caps are worse. The mid-caps are down almost 300 odd points, but the frontliners are actually holding fine in absolutely flat terrain and led by the IT space. Stocks like Infosys, TCS, Tech Mahindra, HCL Tech all topping the charts this afternoon. That's really been the pocket of strength in this market. But let's get you some views of what's happening across the globe. Asian markets were largely positive in trade today. An important event to watch out for is Canada meeting with the US this week to continue negotiations after the two countries failed to reach a trade deal last week. European stocks opened slightly higher amidst emerging market turmoil.
All right, so that was all about the global markets and the equity markets, but you have to look at the currency turmoil as well. Globally and back home in India, the rupee is trading around 71 per dollar, and after it opened at another fresh record low today of 71 rupees 28 paise. And also take a look at crude oil prices. They also remain firm as Iran sanctions loom large. Manisha Gupta is here to take us through all the details on the currency movement and also the commodity space. Manisha.
Thank you so much for that. Well, yes, these are the two things that have kept the markets under pressure. One is the rupee hitting record lows almost every single day for the last 10 or 12 sessions. And the other thing, of course, has been the crude oil prices, which have gained 10% in last 2 weeks itself. You know, the currency space first, and Indian rupee actually continues to be the worst emerging market Asian performing currency. We are down by nearly 11% in this year itself. And with the kind of free fall that we have seen come in for the currency, and with the kind of domestic and global cues that we are dealing with, most of the bankers today on the channel also have reiterated that you could perhaps look at further weakening of the currency. Most banks are now putting out a range between 69 to 73 on the weaker side for the rest of 2018. The bigger concerns, of course, come in from the crude oil prices, where we have seen 70 back in case of the US crude and 78 for the Brent crude prices also. Until now, it has been the concern about Iran sanctions, lower supply coming in from many of the OPEC countries. But the latest trigger comes in from the hurricane season in US, where a couple of platforms in the Gulf of Mexico are being evacuated. Now remember, 16% of the US output comes in from Gulf of Mexico, and that is the latest concern keeping the crude oil prices as well on the higher side.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. So Brent crude continues to surge above that $78 a barrel. We in fact spoke with Jahangir Aziz of JP Morgan. We also spoke with Abhik Barua of HDFC Bank on the rupee trajectory. The consensus view is that now there will be a rate hike in the October policy, and that will be the third successive rate hike that we'll see. Of course, that will lead to crimping of growth as well. Listen in.
Whatever uptick in investment that we've seen over the last couple of quarters is not getting funded domestically. It is getting funded abroad, which is why the current account deficit is widening. In a situation like this, there is no other option but to bring down the current account deficit by the old-fashioned method, which is by reducing growth. I mean, there are two sort of separate things that are happening at the same time, right? There is internal dynamics in India and what's happening in the external front. So if you look at what was happening at the external front from April, let's say up to sometime around end of July, I think that was dollar tightening or dollar appreciating, global financial conditions tightening, and I think that the emerging markets, including India, all reacted to that by letting their currencies depreciate quite a bit, do some sort of an FX intervention, but hardly any interest rate hikes. What is problematic of India is how that growth is being financed.
very difficult to predict, some kind of a level of the rupee at this stage. We are in the middle of a crisis, and unfortunately, I think we don't seem to sort of put adequate emphasis on the fact that it is a crisis. So I think with the rupee in free fall and the consequent, impact on inflation, coupled with the fact that we have bunched up paper supply coming in, I think the possibility of yields tightening further is there. I think even if you go by, the most crude RER calculations, between 71 and 72, you're roughly close to the fair value.
All right, let's take it to the burning topic of FPI investments and the SEBI circular that came in, and whether or not that's the real cause of market volatility and even rupee weakness. An Economic Affairs Secretary has also come in support after a strong comment came in from SEBI as well. My colleague Sapna Das gets us all those important details. Tell us, Sapna.
Hi, Nisha. So basically, the call at the government's end is extremely clear. The Economic Affairs Secretary has clarified that, probably much ado is being made about the recent SEBI circular as far as FPI investments are concerned and beneficial ownership. He has clarified that as per the extent guidelines, NRI investments in any single Indian security is already capped at 5%. And that limit stays as is. The issue is basically that, NRIs are, probably not permitted to invest and manage funds simultaneously. And he tried to indicate that this is as per the existing guidelines. So, at the government's end, there does not appear to be any confusion. That's what the signal that has come in just now. And, of course, the LIC board meet has just concluded. In fact, LIC chairman has just left. So we have been given to understand that the 51% decision, of course, has been taken in the last board meet as well. The timelines are being decided how to, step up the stake up to 51. Open offer, options had been explored in this board meet. But the call probably will also be at the SEBI's end in case an exemption is required. So that's about it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sapna, for that. It's still absolutely flat. It's just that the mid-cap index is under quite a bit of pressure this afternoon, down about 1.5%. HUL, second day running HUL has now fallen 4%. So it's an 8% fall that we're seeing in 2 trading sessions. Haven't seen this kind of a fall on HUL in a while. Don't know what's happening here. Maybe it's, profit taking by some institutional investors, etc. But there is definitely a lot of damage, price and volume damage on HUL. But on to some more corporate action this afternoon. My colleague Reema Tendulkar caught up with Rosto Ramanan, the MD and CEO of Mindtree, at their analyst day yesterday. He says the deal pipeline is significantly higher than what it was before, and their aim is to get back to margins of around 17 to 18%. Take a look.
On win ratios, for example, in 2016, our win ratios were about 22-23%. So if I participated in $100 worth of deals, I would win about 22-23. Now it's probably become 33-34. So it's about a 10% improvement in the win ratios over the last 2 years. Pipeline is almost, I would say, significantly higher, almost like multiples of what the pipeline used to be 2 years back, and much larger than what the pipeline used to be even last year this time. We are conscious that our margins are below our comfort level right now. We got hurt by a few things, including the acquired entities, and the integration had its own challenges, and we are now slowly working through all of those issues right now. Our comfort level was in the previous cycle when the rupee was about 62-63 kind of a range. Mindtree was at 17-18% operating profit or EBITDA level. Trying to get back to that kind of margins is the focus. Now, maybe it will take me more than a year to get there, but that's the priority for the leadership team. So over the next few quarters, we expect that bottom line growth will be faster than top line growth.
All right, so Mindtree has been holding up in the green, but in the last few minutes of trade, it has lost some 20 rupees on that particular counter. So take a look at that one, a sudden downfall really coming in that counter. But remember, the entire IT pack is extremely exuberant today also because of rupee weakening. So if you really keep aside Reliance Industries, most of the contribution coming in for Nifty 50 is coming in from the big IT boys like Infosys, TCS, HCL Tech, Wipro. All of them are really flying high. in trade. Now let's take a view on rupee depreciation, and one particular segment which really gets impacted, which has been pumping in a lot of money in the Indian markets and Indian companies for their growth capital, is the private equity space. And marquee private equity firm Warburg Pincus Vishal Mahadevia says that short-term rupee depreciation is not a worry for the private equity industry and finds the current market volatility an opportunity to invest in India.
We're not panicking. We're not concerned about the rupee in the short term, but over a longer term, I think it's important we keep our macro fundamentals good, and the rupee will behave well.
And stronger dollar as well as weaker rupee also augurs well for making some investments. Is that something that you would be looking at then?
You know, honestly, we don't look at it that way. We actually focus on it on a longer term. The rupee will be a slightly depreciating currency, and we factor that into our returns as we look at it. But it never happens in a straight line like anything in investing and in India. So the fact that the rupee is weaker doesn't increase or decrease our excitement about India. We'd like it over time to be stable and driven by good macro policy.
Also, Vishal, in your portfolio, you have a lot of listed companies. Now, how does market volatility impact your investment decisions at a time like this?
That's a good question, because the market has been volatile, particularly for mid-caps. If you think where we invest, where private equity invests, it's typically companies that are growing, mid-size, that are looking to become large-size, hopefully. I think over the next year, you're going to continue to see volatility. It is an election year. Investors have concerns. You have global events taking place. I think it's an opportunity. So if you ask, I am actually looking at this year as an opportunity for companies like us that are willing to be long-term, look through the short-term volatility, and take a positive call on entrepreneurs and companies.
And as far as your overall strategy is concerned, what are the factors that would really define your strategy going forward?
I think we have always stuck to our knitting of being growth investors and backing very strong entrepreneurs and management teams. I think as you see the companies in India become more discovered, we are seeing more and more entrepreneurs saying we would like to go and start something on our own or buy a platform and build it. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think you'll see us investing behind very established entrepreneurs and partnerships and relationships like an Ajay Piramal, like Sunil Mittal, like people we know really well.
Right.
But I think you'll also see us investing in next generation companies like a Rivigo or an Ecom Express or the platform with Anshuman and Stellar Value Chain Logistics. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. And that part of it is exciting, because if you ask me 5-10 years ago, there was much less of that happening.
Okay, that's the word coming in from Warburg Pincus. But moving on, L&T Infotech is up over 5% in trade today. Reema's here to give us the buzz on that one. Reema.
L&T Infotech indeed is seeing some very strong price action. Now, the company was doing an offer for sale. So yesterday, it was for institutional investors and today for retail investors. And typically, when there is an offer for sale on account of expected supply pressure, you see the stock under pressure. But yesterday, in the offer for sale for institutional investors, the company saw very strong demand. In fact, it got bid up nearly 3 times. On offer was shares, 9.5 million shares, and it saw bids worth 29.8 million shares. Today, you're going to see it for retail investors, which is about 1 million shares on offer. And yesterday, despite the supply being priced at a 6% lower, the stock only ended about 1.5% lower. The floor price for the offer for sale was actually at 1,700, and today we're close to that 1,900 mark. The company's seen very strong growth compared to its peers. The company does not give a guidance, but they have indicated that going ahead as well, it will be in the leadership quadrant. The stock has seen a big move, so up 65% in 2018. It's rallied close to about 150% in the last 1 year. And clearly, going by the price action, you can see there is very strong demand. And despite the supply pressure, the stock is trading strong today.
Take a look at the markets. Well, it's all in the red right now when it comes to the key indices, Sensex, Nifty. In fact, a fair bit of weakness coming in from some of the frontline companies as well. And Mahindra & Mahindra, to say the least, that one, as well as Bajaj Finserv, they all have lost ground to some extent when it comes to the key indices. It's the IT pack which is doing well. And take a look at one particular counter which has been on our radar because of the news flow coming coming in on that particular stock is Hathway. So take a look at that counter, up 15% in trades today. And is it a lease of life with this particular new development coming in and surging in trade up over 14%? The boost comes in after, remember, the news that Netflix partners Hathway to provide video streaming services to the subscribers. Now, under this particular alliance, Netflix will be offered through Hathway's set-top box that includes a remote with a dedicated Netflix button to allow users to launch the service directly. So is it really coming in to save Hathway in a very, very competitive environment? Sonia, I fail to understand how my Netflix is going to work differently. I'm having it without the cable connection.
Absolutely. You need to have a Hathway cable to use Netflix. And in any case, all of us use Netflix with the internet. So, well, it's beneficial for Hathway for sure. I mean, you know, it is a company whose revenues would have sort of gone downhill with the way competition has been surging. So let's see. For now, this will change the game for Hathway, at least in the very near term, with Netflix coming in. But on to our special report, Governor Urjit Patel has completed 2 years as the RBI governor. Ritu Singh joins in with the timeline of his appointment and the key hits and misses during his tenure. Take a look and we'll be back with more on the markets.
2 years ago, Urjit Patel took charge as the new governor of the Reserve Bank of India, marking his maiden monetary policy with a 0.25 percentage point rate cut. Now, barely 2 months in his new role, Urjit Patel faced one of his biggest tests yet, with the government announcing a note ban. Now, it was baptism by fire for the newly appointed governor. While the decision to outlaw 86% of the cash in circulation was political, fingers were pointed at RBI for the mess that followed and the amount of time taken to count the currency that came back. The handling of demonetization and the restoration of currency in the system in the aftermath pretty much dominated Urjit Patel's first Malthus year in office. Of course, now we know that 99% of the demonetized currency did come back. So in the midst of all this began his second important event for his career, and that is the fight against bad loans. And several seminal steps were taken. For instance, in the April of 2017, RBI issued a notification directing banks that if there was more than a 15% difference in their assessment of bad loans versus that of the regulator, that divergence must be disclosed, ending the practice of managing of bad loans by banks. In June of that year, the RBI, for the first time in its history, recognized 12 large defaulters that constituted 25% of the system-wide NPAs and forced banks to send them to NCLT for insolvency proceedings. Now, this was followed by a second list of defaulters, 28 defaulters issued in August, but the most severe blow yet came to defaulters in February of this year, when the RBI issued what is now popularly called the Feb 12 circular. And in the face of staunch criticism by corporates and bankers alike and tremendous pressure to yield from the government, the RBI stood its ground. And even as RBI was facing flack for this Feb 12 circular, one of the largest scams in the history of banking was unearthed at the Punjab National Bank, leading to a bitter face-off between the finance minister and the RBI governor. Now, while the FM blamed the regulator for not being held accountable, Urjit Patel hit back at the government's criticism by pointing to dual regulation in public sector banks, where government interference meant RBI did not have complete powers of regulation. In June this year came another landmark event where RBI for the first time proposed the setting up of a public credit registry to remove the information asymmetry and strengthen the credit culture, which of course for now remains a work in progress. And close on the heels of Urjit Patel's 2 years as RBI governor, now comes the Allahabad High Court order, which upheld RBI's Feb 12 circular, once again reasserting their independence. And a quick look now at the rate trajectory under Urjit Patel. Now, repo rates were first cut twice and then hiked twice, and they're back now at 6.5% levels. As for inflation, which is the primary mandate of RBI, from a low of 1.46% seen in June of 2017 to a high of 5.2% seen in December of 2017, inflation rates still remain marginally higher than RBI's medium-term target. So the key takeaway from Urjit Patel's 2 years as RBI governor, if demonetization led critics to question RBI's autonomy, its tough stance against bad loans has reaffirmed RBI and Urjit Patel's independence.
All right. Thanks, Ritu, for giving us that entire exhaustive roundup of Urjit Patel's tenure. Well, let's take it straight to political news then. And the 2+2 dialogue between India and United States has been scheduled, and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, along with U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis, will be present, and my colleague Parikshit Luthra is closely tracking the developments there and the meeting thereafter. Let's take it straight to him and know what are the key expectations of the 2+2 meet. Parikshit.
Discussions on trade and reducing the trade deficit is going to figure prominently during the 2+2 dialogue here in New Delhi. India is going to raise the issue of tariffs on steel and aluminium. Discussions on agricultural products will also take place, and India would like to tell the United States that it has been making efforts to reduce the trade deficit, and in fact the trade deficit has come down by $1.5 billion in the last 1 year or so. We would also like to make this point that for the first time we've become importers of oil and gas from the United States. In fact, in this calendar year we would be importing up to $2.5 billion worth of oil and gas from the United States. So we would like the US to acknowledge that. There would be comprehensive discussions on Iranian oil as well. Remember, sanctions on Iranian oil kick in on the 4th of November. India is hoping for a waiver, and we would like to tell the US that we are an energy reliant country. We import at least 83% of our energy needs. 25% of that comes from Iranian oil. So we cannot really cut off this relationship with Iran altogether, and many of our refineries are also dependent on Iranian crude as well. So we hope that US would consider these requests as well. On Russia, sources telling us that the S-400 is not on the table as far as discussions are concerned, but you can't really predict what Nirmala Sitharaman might say to her counterpart James Mattis. India would like to communicate to the United States that the S-400 air defense system that we are getting from Russia is crucial for a stronger India and a strong Indo-US strategic partnership as well. Apart from that, there will be discussions on defense, discussions on early agreement on the communications and security agreement, appointing naval liaison officers in Bahrain, and also setting up a hotline between defense ministers. There would be discussions on maritime domain awareness, military-to-military cooperation, co-production, defense innovation as well. Comprehensive discussions on Indo-Pacific, counter-terrorism, Chabahar as well. We have been asking our sources about Donald Trump's possible visit on Republic Day. Sources refuse to comment. It is quite clear that he is not coming to India this year, but whether he comes on Republic Day, that is something we'll really have to wait and watch out for.